Welcome to today's webinar. I'm Lisa Prather, Vice President of Nightlight Christian Adoptions. Next slide. As you all probably know, humans did not create adoption, but God is the author of adoption, as we have a few scriptures here that talk about that. Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself unstained by the world, James 1:27. And we are all called to care for orphans. Next slide. So first, we want to just let you know a little bit about Nightlight. We were established in 1959, and we are now operating licensed offices in 8 states. Since 1959, we have placed over 4,000 children into loving families in the past 20 years. That is through our domestic infant adoption program, our international program, our foster to adopt program, and our Snowflakes embryo adoption program. So today, during this webinar, what we're going to do is go over these different types of adoption and help you identify what is the right type of adoption for you. One of the questions we want to ask first off is, why be a waiting family when there are waiting children? Nightlight has a website, and it is adoptionbridge.org, where you can go and view hundreds of profiles of waiting children. One of the most effective ways to choose a program is by identifying a child that you want to adopt. You can go to this website and you can search children by age, or you can search by region of the world. Next slide. In addition, Adoption Bridge is also a place where you can do crowdfunding. Many families, of course, are concerned about how they will pay for their adoption. No one walks in and is able to just write a blank check to pay for their adoption. So we want to make sure that families know that there are a lot of options for you. There are no interest loans. There are many organizations that offer grants. And then, of course, there is the adoption tax credit. We want to make sure that you also know that the Adoption Bridge website is one that is probably the best one out there for doing crowdfunding, because many organizations such as GoFundMe and Pure Charity will charge a management fee for your funds. And the Adoption Bridge website, the only fee that is charged to you is whatever the credit card is charging, the credit card company is charging. All of the rest of the fees go straight to the family. We do not charge a management fee. Next slide. Okay, so now we're going to discuss embryo adoption, so I'm going to turn things over to Deb.
Actually, it's Kimberly, and I am so glad to be with you today. This is Kimberly Tyson. I'm the Director and Program Manager for the Snowflakes Embryo Adoption Program, and we like to talk about our embryo adoption program as adoption just 9 months earlier than quote-unquote normal. Most people don't know this. Did you know you can actually give birth to your adopted child? Yes, it is possible through embryo adoption. There are over 1 million embryos in frozen storage in the United States. Where do all these embryos come from? Well, they come from couples who used an infertility treatment called in vitro fertilization. And during in vitro fertilization, couples make embryos in order to achieve a pregnancy. Oftentimes, they create more embryos than they end up using for themselves. So the embryos are remaining and in frozen storage, and the couple will either keep them in frozen storage, thaw them and discard them, donate them to science, or donate them for reproduction. And so they can donate them for reproduction through the Snowflakes Embryo Adoption Program. This program, Snowflakes, has been successful for many families who did not have success using IVF themselves, or they've been diagnosed with infertility, or perhaps they've learned that they are carrying a specific genetic defect in their DNA, and they really don't want to have children using their own egg and sperm. So embryo adoption can be a really good option for them. And it's a really fast-track option for infant adoption if you're specifically interested in adopting an infant child. The advantages of embryo adoption are many. As opposed to the domestic adoption program, you get to have control of the prenatal environment because you're the one carrying the baby. You get to have that period of prenatal bonding for you and the baby you're carrying, for your husband, and just all that nurturing and preparing for the arrival of baby. You get to nurse the child. And there's a great security in the placement of an embryo adoption because in the United States, the woman who gives birth to the child and the man to whom she is married to, these are the names that go on the birth certificate. So there isn't any requirement to finalize the adoption in the court system. In addition to this law within our country, the contracts that the families are signing in the exchange of the embryos, the placing family is terminating all of their rights and responsibilities to the embryos. Embryo adoption tends to be a very affordable adoption choice, and it's well worth considering when compared to domestic adoption or international adoption. The other form of adoption, foster adoption, can be the least expensive form of adoption, but embryo adoption is very affordable and a great way to bring an infant child into your family. The Snowflakes process at a very high level flows like this. You have the application phase where we're getting a letter from your physician that states that you don't have any reason why you can't carry a pregnancy to term. It isn't that you have to demonstrate that you've carried a pregnancy to term. It's just that there are no contraindications to pregnancy. And also during this phase, you're completing the application, the agreement for services. You need to get an adoption home study completed, and you're also building your family profile, which is going to be used in phase number 2, which is matching. During the matching phase, our donor families are presented with your profile, and they get to determine if that is a match that they would like to pursue. If they do, you get to review the donor's profile, and then the fertility clinic gets to review the embryology report of the embryos that you would be receiving in that match. In phase 3, we move into contracts. Then into phase 4, we move into shipping. At the shipping phase, you, the adopting family, are now the quote-unquote owners of the embryos because in the United States, embryos are considered property and not people. And so the process is governed by property law rather than adoption law. After the embryos are shipped to the clinic where you'll have your frozen embryo transfer performed by a medical professional, hopefully you will achieve a pregnancy. That'll be learned about 2 weeks after your transfer, and then you'll carry your baby for 9 months, and then you will welcome your baby home. It's a pretty straightforward process. The other thing that's really nice about embryo adoption is you can be matched with a placing family who has multiple embryos to donate to you, enabling you to have, excuse me, enabling you to have multiple frozen embryo transfers with genetically related embryos. So it's possible to actually have children that you have adopted into your family that are genetically related to one another. And isn't that just the sweetest picture? I love that one. Next, we're going to move into our international adoption program, and I'm going to switch it back over to Lisa, and she's going to share with us a little bit about international adoption. Lisa?
Thank you, Kimberly. Yes, now we're going to talk a little bit about international adoption and what are the reasons that people typically choose international adoption. Next slide. Of course, the biggest pull for a lot of people who choose this option is just having a heart for children around the world who need a family. Another thing about international that's different is that with a domestic adoption, for example, you would be waiting to be chosen by a birth mother, and with an international adoption, you are typically waiting for the country to send you a referral of a child. Of course, if you adopt a waiting child, then your time frame would be much shorter. Another difference to this program is just certainty of custody, because in most cases, the adoption occurs in the country where your child is born, and but then once you travel back to the U.S., there's no further possibility that anyone could want you to reunite the child with the family. Another great thing about international is that sibling groups are available through many of our countries. So for families who are wanting to adopt more than one child, that is another option. Next slide. So how do people choose a country? Well, first of all, many countries have eligibility requirements for adoptive couples. So that's one way to narrow down your choices, is to look and see if you in fact meet the criteria for the country. Another important consideration is travel time. How many trips do you need to make? How long do you need to be in country? Oftentimes that will help you eliminate countries where the travel is beyond what you can do. Cost is certainly a factor and should be considered in your choice, but I always tell families that cost should not be your #1 priority in choosing a program. If you feel called to a specific country or a specific child, God will provide the funds that are needed through some of the avenues that we mentioned earlier. Many countries make exceptions to eligibility requirements if you're choosing a waiting child. Next slide. A great way to meet a waiting child is through our hosting program. So Nightlight offers hosting programs. These usually occur once or twice a year in the summer and at Christmas time. And the children come here for 2 to 3 weeks, and they live with you and get to experience family life. This helps to overcome a lot of myths and fears about adopting an older child, and it also gives the child an opportunity to be seen by other potential adoptive families. So even if you yourself were to say, well, we don't feel comfortable adopting a waiting child, you may want to host a waiting child so that that child can meet other couples in your church or family and community who may want to adopt that child. It also lets your children, if you have other children in your home, experience another culture and grow in compassion for the less fortunate. Next slide. Nightlight has 18 international programs, and we have a tool that's called a Quick Looks or a country overview that you can access on our website that can also help you narrow down your options for different countries. It's really just a snapshot of each country, such as eligibility requirements, the age of children that are available, the travel time that might be involved. Next slide. So how do you get started? Well, with international adoption, the first step is selecting a country. You will then process your application and your home study. Your home study has to be written to the country's specific requirements, so that's why you have to choose a country first and then move forward after you've chosen a country. You will register your dossier, which is a lot of paperwork that you put together for the country, and then you wait for a referral. Unless you've chosen a waiting child, and then you just wait for the official documents for that child to be matched with your family. Then you will travel to the country to meet your child, and depending on the country, you will either return home on the first trip or have to make more than one trip. In most of our country programs, the adoption is finalized in the country of your child's birth, but there are some exceptions to that where some countries provide you with a guardianship ruling, and then you come to the U.S. and you do a finalization of that adoption here in the U.S. All of this, of course, has to go through immigration process, and so we help you with that both at the beginning and at the end. And then once you're home with your child, there are post-adoption reports that are required by the country of your child's birth, and those vary depending upon the country requirements. Obviously, the country would like to be reassured that your child is in a good placement and that they made a good choice by allowing the child to come to the U.S. And so these reports are really important for reassuring the country and helping them to continue to do adoptions to the U.S. Next slide. I believe that we are going to be moving to domestic adoption, and so I'm going to turn things over to Katie.
Hi, my name is Katie England, and I have the pleasure of being able to work with women that are making an adoption plan for their unplanned pregnancy, as well as families that are looking to do a domestic adoption. So what is a domestic adoption? A domestic adoption is most commonly an adoption plan made by birth parents that are facing an unplanned pregnancy. Typically, women make this plan at some point during their pregnancy. On occasion, we have worked with moms that have made a plan for a child that they have already delivered, but that's not as common. Adoption is a choice that is made by the birth parents and most commonly by the birth mother, though we do work with birth fathers as well, and we encourage their participation in the adoption plan as well. A domestic adoption is irrevocable once the adoption is finalized. That's a key, that it's once the adoption is finalized, because in some states a birth mother does have the opportunity to change her mind, and we'll get to that a little bit later. So deciding if you are right for a domestic adoption, there's a couple of questions that you need to ask yourself. One, are you open to a relationship with the birth parents? It's very important. Adoption has changed through the years, and most birth parents are looking to at least meet the adoptive family. Do you desire to adopt a newborn infant? That is most commonly what a domestic adoption is an infant adoption. Do you understand that birth parents can change their mind? And again, this depends on the state and as to when they can change their mind. But a parent in most states can change their mind at any point up to delivery. Do you understand that there are potential legal risks? Some of these risks may involve the birth father, and some may involve the Native American. If the birth family is Native American, there may be some legal risks there as well. Okay, so understanding the process. The birth mother does choose the adoptive family, so families create a profile book to present to birth parents, and then the birth parents will look through those profile books and select the family that she would like to adopt her child. Understanding the cost. Financial assistance may be available, and there is the IRS tax credit. Fundraising for your adoption is also a great way to help offset the cost. As Lisa discussed earlier with Adoption Bridge, it's an excellent way to raise funds for your adoption. And again, understanding the risks. Birth parents may have been abusing substances. There may be little to no prenatal care. There may be little information about the birth parent's history. Birth parents can change their mind. There are several different legal risks that are involved in a domestic adoption, and you do need to be aware of those risks. Next slide. Okay. Time for baby. When your birth mother goes into labor, Nightlight contacts the adoptive family. The birth mother will have developed a hospital plan and may request that the adoptive parents be at the hospital or even in the delivery room for the birth. And they get to determine who they want to cut the cord and who they want to hold the baby first. Now, birth moms do have the opportunity to interact with their baby. They may choose to do so. They may choose not to. That just depends on the birth mom. Typically, the adoptive family is able to bond with the baby at the hospital and has the opportunity to hold and feed the baby. Again, this does depend on the birth mom and what her desires are. Relinquishment documents are typically signed at the hospital in most states. The timing and way that the relinquishment documents depend a lot on state law, so they vary. Next slide. Okay, so then going home and finalization. If the adoptive family lives in a state that's different from the state that the baby was born, the adoptive family will likely have to remain in the state of their child's birth for 7 days or more to wait for the approval from the state social services in each of the 2 states. This is commonly referred to as ICPC. It's the Interstate Compact for the Placement of Children, and both states have to give permission for the adoption to move forward and for the child to be able to be returned to the adoptive family's home state. The adoption is then finalized in either the adoptive family state or in the state where the baby was born. Sometimes this can be a decision of the adoptive family, but sometimes it's dictated by state law where the child was born or where the family resides. And the time in which the adoption finalizes also depends on state law. Some states dictate that there be a certain number of months after placement prior to finalization, and some states do not. There are also post-placement reports, very similar to an international adoption where they have post-adoption reports. In a domestic adoption, they have post-placement reports that are done after placement occurs but prior to finalization occurring. And the number of those reports and the timing and when they're done depends on the state's laws. And then when it's time to finalize your hearing, in some cases, an attorney will have to go with you to court for a finalization hearing, and in other states that's not necessary. But in any state, it's a very happy time and something to definitely rejoice. And now we are getting ready to talk about foster adopt, so I'm going to turn it over to Megan.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, I'm Megan Nally, and I am the Foster Care Program Manager for our Colorado office. Next slide, please. So at the time of this recording, Nightlight has foster care and foster to adopt programs in Colorado and California, but all of our Nightlight offices are currently in the process of developing programs, so stay tuned. Every state in the U.S. operates their own foster care system, and some states operate on a county basis. You do have the ability to pursue foster care through your local county or state. However, a huge benefit of working with an agency is that we can match you with a child from any state in the U.S., regardless of whether you live in that child's state of residence or not. Next slide, please. So you might be wondering, what exactly is foster care and why consider pursuing adoption through it? Foster care is the temporary placement of a child or youth outside of their homes. Typically what occurs is a concerned neighbor, school teacher, or possibly a stranger in a Walmart parking lot makes a call to the child abuse hotline number and reports a concern for a child's welfare. The county will investigate, and if they determine the child is in immediate danger or if there's concern for their overall safety and well-being, they'll remove the child from the situation and place them into foster care. Once a child enters foster care, their biological parents are given a treatment plan that addresses the concerns that resulted in the child's initial removal. If the parents are unable to demonstrate they can be safe caregivers for their children, the court will terminate parental rights and the child becomes legally free for adoption. I would like to point out that once parental rights have been terminated, the biological parents cannot decide to come back and take their children, another common misconception about foster care. Children in foster care do range between the ages of birth and 21. They're all in need of forever families. They range in gender, with about 56% being male and 47% female, and all ethnicities are represented. There are also many sibling groups in foster care. Next slide, please. When looking at pursuing foster care and/or adoption from the foster care system, there are quite a few benefits to working with Nightlight. Our main role in this process is to be your advocate and help you walk through and navigate what can be at times a complicated system. County and state caseworkers are unfortunately notorious for being overworked, so we're intentional about maintaining small caseloads so you have the one-on-one attention that you deserve. Our matching process is extensive and thorough because adoption is a lifelong process and journey, and we want to make sure it's the right fit for both the child and your family. Our training is comprehensive. We conduct the state-mandated training with a trauma focus to help you understand the impact of trauma, abuse, neglect on children and their development. And we all know that parenting, just like marriage, doesn't end when the baby comes home. In addition to our pre-certification training, we're here to help provide one-on-one guidance and support throughout the process with our staff that has many years of experience both professionally and personally. And lastly, we are a Christian agency, and we love praying for our families both one-on-one and corporately if you're open to that. Next slide, please. So looking at the process, after completing your state-required training, which the numbers of hours will vary per state, and completing your home study, we communicate with local counties and look through the different websites such as Adopt US Kids or Heart Galleries to help find a match for your family. Once you and the county have decided to move forward, you have the opportunity to meet the child and transition them into your home. The transition time, however, does vary depending on how soon the child needs placement. After the child is placed in your home, you can expect monthly home visits with your Nightlight caseworker and the county caseworker prior to the adoption finalization. The number of monthly home visits does vary per state. At that point, we head to finalization. Next slide, please. So in thinking about whether foster care or foster to adopt is right for you, there are a couple things to keep in mind. Our foster adoption program is the most affordable adoption program. Every child in foster care is covered under Medicaid, and the county also provides you with a monthly stipend to help cover the additional expenses that come from raising a child. There are less restrictions on who can actually become a foster parent compared to some of the other programs, and there are currently thousands of children right now who are in need of forever families. And now I'm going to hand it back to Lisa.
Thanks, Megan. Well, as you can see, there are a lot of different options and ways that you can adopt. Now let's talk about what is the right way for your family. How do you determine that? Well, if you desire less risk in the adoption process and more certainty in the outcome, or if you just feel compassion for orphans around the world and are even willing to consider a waiting child or a child with a medical need, then international adoption is probably a great choice for you. Next slide. If you are not able to or have no desire to be pregnant and are tired of infertility treatments, but you do want to adopt a newborn, and if you're willing to consider a relationship with a birth mother and helping a woman in a crisis situation, then domestic adoption would be the better fit. Next slide. If you are unable to conceive but able to carry, and you are not able to give up the hope to be pregnant, then obviously embryo adoption is a great choice for your family. Next slide. If you want a placement quickly and cost is a concern and you have a heart for the children in your community, then foster adoption is a good avenue for your family. Next slide. So, now that we've gone through all of these options, we understand that adoption is not necessarily right for everyone. Not everyone is called to be an adoptive parent, but as everyone is called to help orphans and widows, as we talked about at the very beginning of this webinar. So what are some ways that you can help if you do not feel called to adopt? Well, one way is through our website that we talked about. We not only do crowdfunding for families, which you're welcome to go on there and look at a family and make a donation, but we also have crowdfunding for our waiting kids. And if you make donations toward those waiting kids, it can often help them find a family faster who maybe was concerned about cost. Also, we have a scholarship fund that you can make a donation to. Anyone can advocate for a waiting child. If you follow Nightlight on Facebook and Instagram, we share our waiting kids. We have a waiting kid on Wednesday, every Wednesday, and you can share that on social media and tell your friends. Prayer, of course, is huge for us. We would love for you to pray for waiting orphans and waiting families. And as I mentioned earlier, since God is the author of adoption and He sets the lonely in families, the enemy wants to oppose that mission. So this is a spiritual battle, and we covet your prayers. Please tell a friend who might be struggling to get pregnant or has a heart for orphans. Many people don't even know about the option of embryo adoption, so by sharing that, you could be bringing the answer that a family or friend is looking for. If you desire to move forward with any of these programs or just have more questions, please feel free to contact us. The contact information on this slide. You may call us or you can send us an email, and one of the ladies on this webinar or another person, expert in our staff, will be able to answer your questions. Thank you again for attending today's webinar. Have a nice day.